Hi, everyone. Thanks for showing up today. Today, we're going to talk about conflict and just a bit of an introduction to conflict resolution, which is one of those topics that we could spend days talking about. Today, we're not going to spend days, we'll spend about 10 minutes. Um, so, I want to talk a little bit about what the meaning of conflict is. And when we talk about conflict, what we're talking about. So, the definition of conflict is a serious disagreement, a struggle, or an argument that leads to a clash and leads to tension. And then it can also be used as a verb, which is, I'm in conflict with your values or whatever it might be. And that's being incompatible or clashing. Um, Conflict has a really negative connotation, and we do our best to avoid it, often in unhealthy ways. But conflict is a part of being human, and it's part of all human relationships. We're all different. We all have different opinions. We all have different styles. So to think that we're not going to encounter conflict in a workplace is not right. So what we need to do is we need to figure out what our relationship with conflict is, to try to have as much healthy conflict as we possibly can, and again understand some of the factors that lead to conflict that perhaps we can figure out how to be a little bit more proactive about. Um, so we all have a relationship with conflict. Some people avoid it at all costs, and have a perception that nice people don't have conflict. They're agreeable. They get along with everyone. They go with the flow, and conflict is bad, and just don't want to have any part of that. Some people consider conflict as something that is a necessary part of always being right, of knowing everything, of it always being somebody else's fault. And so their approach to conflict in that case is one of defense, where they're happy to have conflict because their self awareness is such that they're positioning themselves in a way that they're thinking they're always right. Probably the most difficult part of conflict, or kind of conflict, I should say, is passive aggressive conflict. And I want to speak specifically about that because the trick there is that when we avoid conflict, we often push it underground. That doesn't take the conflict away. That doesn't resolve the conflict. What that does is actually make it passively aggressive. So, passive aggressive conflict is still conflict. It's just done in a way that's still aggressive, but it's done passively. And it probably is the most insidious and the most difficult conflict to actually surface so that it can be resolved. So the difference between a conflict where there's a clash, people don't agree, they yell at each other, they go away, and maybe they get along in the future, maybe not. That's the overt conflict. That's a conflict that we know and understand. Passive aggressive conflict, doing the same thing, just behind the scenes, underground. And so it actually just sort of eats away at healthy relationships and the ability to resolve conflict in a healthy way. So, what I want to talk about a little bit is some of the reasons that conflict occurs in the workplace, and there are a bunch of them. The first one may be that you need somebody else's help to do the work that you're doing. So you're dependent on them, and their priorities are not your priorities. So as a result of this interdependence and this task-based work, there's conflict there, because you are not aligned and you don't understand each other's priorities. A second kind can be leadership based, leadership styles. You may have conflict with a boss or a supervisor. You may have conflict with a team member because your leadership style is not the style that they respond to, or that your leadership style isn't working. Or in the case of somebody who reports to someone, their leadership style isn't motivating or engaging or inspiring. And therefore, you have a clash in or conflict from leadership style. Sometimes it's working styles. You have somebody who's a real task oriented, get her done kind of a person, has a to do list, checks things off their to do list, working on a task, with somebody who is a procrastinator who likes to wait until the last minute because that's the way that they roll with their work. Well, you can get conflict as a result of that because you have two very different working styles. Same with personality styles. There's all sorts of different personalities where we all have our own personalities, and some personalities get along really well, and others, there's a bit of a clash. Somebody who tells you everything they're feeling versus somebody who is much more quiet and introverted and doesn't share much about themselves. Those kinds of things may well lead to conflict in the workplace. Sometimes the conflict is more complex because it's discriminatory, or it's based on race or religion or gender, and it's really a very terrible environment because the conflict comes from judgments about people because of, as I say, gender or race, and it's discriminatory. Um, Sometimes conflict stems from information, people either having different information, different amounts of information, using different information to try to make decisions. Information, the knowledge is power thing, and withholding information, there can be conflict there. Definitely a clash in values, whether it's real or perceived. When two people or a team of people are working together and there are very different values on that team, that may lead to unhealthy conflict. And relate the complexities of human relationships. So, thinking about misperceptions, emotions, communication, lack thereof. There's so many parts to human relationships that are kind of fraught with opportunities for conflict. And so, as people who are trying to be better leaders, we need to understand what our relationship with conflict is and how exactly that impacts our ability to lead and influence others. So, what I want to think about now, or what I want to talk about, and I guess I've already thought about it a little bit, but I want to talk about conflict within ourselves, because so oftentimes we think of conflict as you and me, or you against me. And so oftentimes, conflict actually starts within ourselves. And sometimes if somebody is having conflicts with other people, it actually is a result of what's going on with themselves. And again, one of the things we've learned in our leadership journey is the first person we always have to look at is ourselves. And then there is also conflict between two people. Should quote that the resource I use a lot in my work on conflict resolution, Intro to Conflict, is from the Achieve Leadership Group. A fantastic booklet on conflict resolution. If you don't have it, I would suggest that you get it. They give it to you for free. It's through the achieve.com. Try that. That may well work. And it really is great. Anyway, so they describe it as spheres of conflict. So there is a conflict within yourself, conflict with one or other people, conflict within teams, conflict between teams, and then systemic conflict. So those are what are described as the spheres of conflict, and each one of those are slightly different. Let's talk about misunderstandings and assumptions and lack of communication, because I think that's actually the crux of this. So oftentimes conflict starts with a negative or incorrect assumption about someone else's intentions. And when we're impacted, we assume that they intended us to feel that way. And if we assume negative intent, that often leads to conflict. Actions are public. When somebody yells at you, that's very public. Their intentions and the effects of their intentions on you are private. It's like the tip of the iceberg. What we see is the action. So if somebody doesn't say good morning to me, That's the action I see. What I don't understand is the intention. What they don't understand is the impact on me. So we always make assumptions that our intentions are clear. Well, I didn't say good morning because I was busy working on a proposal that's due at 10 o'clock. So that's why I didn't say good morning. I assume that the other person understands that. I don't communicate that. I just assume that they understand that. So we make assumptions that our intentions are clear. Yet we also make assumptions that the other person meant to impact us as they did. So the fact that I didn't say good morning to you is not actually me rejecting you and not liking you. It's because I was busy being focused on something